What's up, everybody? This is a video I've been wanting to do for the last couple of days now, but I'm finally getting around to it. And the NFL recently released its all-decade team for the 2010s. Now, what an all-decade team is basically, it's like an all-pro team for a full decade. So essentially, it's 10 years of football, and these are the best players at the positions over those 10 years. Now, why this matters is because the all-decade team play a large role in player historical capital. In the sense, they're huge when it comes to things like the Hall of Fame. If you're on a member of an all-decade team, if you're a first team member of an all-decade team, that counts for a lot. I mean, that's a big deal. That's basically saying you're the best player or one of the two best players at your positions over a 10-year span. So being a first member or even a second member of an all-decade team is huge in terms of evaluating players historically and also looking back in the decades themselves and seeing who dominated which decade or not. With that being said, I do agree with a lot of decisions the NFL made. I'm actually going to show you my screen in a little bit here. I'm going to go through the actual team itself. But there are some decisions I don't really agree with, some things I wish they changed. There's some players I think who are deserving who didn't get any acknowledgement at all. And I think we should dive into that. But I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to pull up the original tweets where they announced the NFL teams so we can see those. Let me just put this ready. Share screen. Application window. All right. So we're sharing this tab, so you should see this right now. So this is the offensive portion of the team. We've got Tom Brady. I'm assuming, by the way, I don't know, because I know there's first and second teams on all-decade teams. It doesn't tell us who is first team, who's second team. I think we could assume some guys are first team and some are second. It doesn't tell us for sure. And this is all alphabetized and not by last name. It's not done by who's first and who's second team, so we don't know for sure. I don't want to necessarily assume. I know there's certain guys, obviously, are first team. Certain guys are then obviously second team as a result. But I don't want to even go into who's first or who's second. I want to go into who's here and who's not here. So starting at the quarterback position, it's Tom Brady, and you can see that's a unanimous selection. Him, Joe Thomas, Marshall Yahn, and Adrian Pearson, the only unanimous selections on offense. I think that's fitting. Obviously, Tom Brady, he's the greatest player of all time. I think he's like 9 Super Bowl appearances, 6 Super Bowl championships. I mean, obviously, it's a resume no one can compete with right now. And then Aaron Rodgers is right behind him. And obviously, Aaron Rodgers is clearly the second team quarterback in Tom Brady's first team. Personally, when I wrote an article for the Grueling Truth, I'll link it in the description. But when I wrote an article for the Grueling Truth back in January 8th, and I was predicting the all-decade team, I had Drew Brees in second place. Now I can say this because I've never been an Aaron Rodgers fan. I know he won 2 MVPs. That probably puts him over the top just by itself. But I really think Aaron Rodgers has not accomplished a lot over the last couple of years specifically. He's dealt with injuries, that kind of thing. His teams have been winning, but they haven't been winning in the way that we would usually measure quarterback play. Hasn't made it to an NFC Championship game really recently. And I'm a little biased against Aaron Rodgers. I'll just admit that. I mean, I'm a Steelers fan, so it's kind of how it is. But I do think Drew Brees is probably deserving of this all-decade team. I think he's been overlooked a lot. He's never won an MVP. I think that's something that should have been rectified a long time ago. Just based on how often in this past decade he's set new standards, and especially completion percentage. Like, people talk about his raw passing yards numbers. How about his completion percentage? I mean, that's ridiculous what he's done over the last couple of years. So I would personally lean towards Drew Brees, even though I think that's a close race. I think I understand why they put Aaron Rodgers, but I would lean towards Drew Brees in that scenario. And then we go on to the running backs. I don't have any disagreement with the running backs, really. I mean, these are the guys you would expect to be there. I don't know why I skipped down to running backs. That's just what I had next to my article, so I went there immediately. But Frank Gore, Marshall Lynch, Sean McCoy, Adrian Pearson, those really are the 4 who had consistent success throughout the decade. People will throw names like probably Todd Gurley or Zeke Elliott in, and my response to that is guys like McCoy, Gore, Peterson, Lynch, they've all been going for almost the entire decade, if not all the decade. So they have so much more experience than guys like Gurley. And even if Gurley might have had a higher peak than someone, say, like Sean McCoy or Marshawn Lynch, he can't really compete because there's 5 or 6 extra years of work put in for the other guys. And I do think when you're looking at an all-decade team, you should take that into account. So I think these are the right selections for a running back spot. At wide receiver, I am totally agreeing with these selections as well. I think this is the right decision. I think they got all 4 of those right. I don't have any complaints. There's one guy I think we could make an argument for who's not there, and that would be DeAndre Hopkins, because Hopkins he's been a first-team All-Pro selection the last 3 years in a row, 4 Pro Bowls, played with similar situations that Larry Fitzgerald dealt with at points during his career, where he's playing with guys who really aren't NFL quarterbacks or guys who are really just backups playing at starting positions. So I got DeAndre Hopkins. I think should be in consideration, but at the same point, he entered the NFL in 2013. When we talk about guys like Antonio Brown and Julio Jones, they have basically a year or 2 of really productive football ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. That really changes things. You look at someone like Antonio Brown, who finished the decade with 11,000 yards versus DeAndre Hopkins, who finishes with like 8,500. So that's a significant difference in those numbers. So I think that's why Hopkins got left out on this list. And at tight end, I don't think there's any debate about the tight end spot. It's got to be Gronk and it's got to be Travis Kelce. I know some people are saying Jimmy Graham. I don't understand where you're getting that from. The Jimmy Graham debate really, to me, is something that's been shut down for a while now. He hasn't been relevant since he joined Green Bay. So the last 2 years, he hasn't been a really relevant tight end. And did make the Pro Bowl 2 years in Seattle, but really it was only about 1 solid year of production. Think about it. He had like 520 yards in 2017, but he still made the Pro Bowl because he had 10 touchdowns. The year before that, only 6 touchdowns, but 923 yards. That's really not in 2 great seasons. It's really kind of like 1 good year matched together, really, in terms of production. That's not really 2 solid seasons. And he really hasn't been a dominant force in the league since 2013. You could say maybe 2014. And I'd say he probably had 4 years of true dominance in the NFL, maybe 5 during his past decade. And he said 5, but he made 5 Pro Bowls, so that makes sense. If he had 5 years of dominant football in him. Hit someone like Gronkowski, you could say, well, he probably only had 5 as well because of the injuries. But his peak was so much higher, I don't think it's even close. I mean, Jimmy Graham was a 1-time first-team All-Pro, Gronkowski, 4-time first-team All-Pro, and 3-time Super Bowl champion. I think that makes a huge difference. I don't think anyone's arguing that Gronk is the better player than Graham. I think what the argument sometimes I see is Travis Kelce. Again, that's something I don't understand. He's got a Super Bowl at this point, and now he's had, if you're counting, you're saying Graham's had 5 dominant years. Well, then Kelce's had 6 in terms of statistical production. He's had about 6 years on the equivalent scale of Graham's best seasons in the NFL, including 4 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons, which is an NFL record for tight ends. So a guy like Kelce, in my opinion, is above Graham, and I don't think that's even close. I think Kelce is the right selection at the tight end spot. Now move on to tackles. Tackles is a little bit more of an open book situation. Joe Thomas is obviously a unanimous selection. I totally agree with that. I'm not going to debate that. He's probably the best offensive lineman who will come up for the Hall of Fame voting since Walter Jones or Jonathan Ogden, whichever one of them is the most recent one. So I have no qualms with Joe Thomas being unanimous. I think he'll be the guy who gets – I think he'll be the offensive lineman who has been in the NFL most recently to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's got the best chance, at least, out of any player who is going up for the Hall eventually. And then, of course, put Jason Peters. And Jason Peters, people forget about this because he's declining right now towards the end of the decade. But he opened up the decade with 6 Pro Bowls in the first 7 years. And he was a 2-time first-team All-Pro in 2011 and 2013. He also won a Super Bowl with the Eagles, even though he was injured during that time. So for him, it's more what he did about the very beginning of the decade. I think a lot of people, or at least a lot of fans who've come into the sport in the last 3 or 4 years, won't see that, and they'll be like, what's he doing on this list? But you have to realize 10 years is a very long time. And we often don't look at the full extent of the years. We look at recency bias. Well, we're talking about the full body of work here. And Jason Peters has that body of work to get him this spot. And then the other two, Tyron Smith, who I think we can all agree has been declining or hasn't been playing at the usual level that we had him at one point in time. Looked like he was kind of like the next Joe Thomas or the next great left tackle right around 2016. He's now had 4 consecutive years where he's played 13 games, so he's missed a total of 12 games in the last 4 years. He's been a Pro Bowler every year, but he's only got those 2 first-team All-Pro selections. He has not made an All-Pro team since 2016, which was his last first-team All-Pro selection. So he's been declining or leveling out. I don't know however you want to say it, but overall, for the decade, 7 Pro Bowls, 2-time first-team All-Pro. I mean, that makes sense. You would expect someone with those kind of accolades to get. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's the exact same resume Jason Peters has. So, well, minus a Super Bowl appearance, but it's pretty much the same thing. So that makes sense for me. And then Joe Staley. Now, this is the one where I think you could debate it. Staley's a 6-time Pro Bowler. Been very consistent, even though I know he missed about half the season this past year. But under ordinary circumstances, it's been very consistent throughout the decade. It's something hard to find in a left tackle. And he's a 3-time second-team All-Pro during the decade. My argument for the guy would be Andrew Thomas. Andrew Whitworth. I think you get Andrew Whitworth in ahead of Joe Staley. Because that's who I picked for my all-decade team when I did it for the Grueling Truth. And the reason I did that is Staley, like I said, 3-time second-team All-Pro, 6 Pro Bowls. Andrew Whitworth, 4 Pro Bowls, 2-time first-team All-Pro. And to me, well, also he's got a second-team All-Pro selection in 2014. So he had a little bit of a higher peak during the decade, maybe not as consistent. He obviously started off the decade with Cincinnati and then transferred to the Rams. And kind of in this last 2014 to 2017, 2018 range was his most successful years. Now, obviously, he's starting to decline quite a bit. Probably never make another Pro Bowl, but I think there's a debate to be had there between Staley and Whitworth. Either way, I don't think it's a bad decision. Another guy could possibly throw into the ring would be Trent Williams, who plays for the Washington Redskins. He's probably been more consistent than Andrew Whitworth, I'd say, in terms of plays. Made 7 Pro Bowls in a row. Obviously, didn't make one last year because he sat out and did not play for Washington at all. Unfortunately, he only has 1 second-team All-Pro selection. That's his only All-Pro selection, which is probably why he didn't end up making the team. But still a very consistent player who deserves some credit. The guard spot, Logan Mankins, I expected. Zach Martin, I think we all expected. Marshall Yanda should have been unanimous. He's by far the best guard. The best resume, I guess we could say, not the best guard. I think the best guard is Zach Martin. But Marshall Yanda, 8 Pro Bowls, 2-time first-team All-Pro, multiple second-team All-Pro selections, and a Super Bowl title. So he's obviously up there. Zach Martin's probably been the best guard of this decade. 4-time first-team All-Pro. It's hard to argue against that. But the guy I would say who probably gets left out in this group is David DeCastro. But I don't think, looking back on, I had David DeCastro on my selection. But again, I'm a Steelers fan, so maybe a little bit biased there. But DeCastro, 5 Pro Bowls, 2-time first-team All-Pro. As opposed to Jerry Evans, who 6 Pro Bowls, 4-time first-team All-Pro. So obviously he's got the higher peak, great level of dominance. So I don't really disagree with that looking at it in hindsight. I take issue with Alex Mack. Now, I know Alex Mack is a very good center because he played in Cleveland for a long time. And he was one of the few pieces holding the team together, him along with Joe Thomas. He's a very good center. 6 Pro Bowls, although he hasn't made a Pro Bowl since 2018, so he missed last year. And he's been a second-team All-Pro 3 times. So he's been a very good center for the entirety of the decade. His first Pro Bowl even came in 2010, so he's been there the entire time. Jason Kelce should absolutely have replaced him on this team. Jason Kelce has 3 Pro Bowls. He's a 3-time first-team All-Pro, and he's got a Super Bowl appearance. Now, he's a first-team All-Pro in 2017 when he didn't make the Pro Bowl, and in 2018 when he didn't make the Pro Bowl. So if you think about it, the fans just basically screwed him out of a Pro Bowl selection. If he'd actually been given Pro Bowls in the years he played well, he'd have 5 Pro Bowls, and he'd be a 3-time first-team All-Pro. I think you have to look at that number, like 3-time first-team All-Pro. That's more than Marquise Pouncey, who I think should be the starting center on the first team for the first all-decade team. I don't think that should be a contest because he's been the most consistent for the longest. But Kelce, again, a highest peak by far, better than better than Alex Mack, and even has more first-team All-Pro selections than Marquise Pouncey. So to me, Jason Kelsey is the guy who really got screwed out of the spot here. And then looking at Darren Sproles' selection, the flex spot, I understand there's some debate over where the flex spot includes return yards and stuff like that. Personally, I've never thought of the flex as a return yard spot. That's why on my team I flexed a receiver. I put I think I put Hopkins. What did I do? I put Hopkins as a starting second team receiver, and I flexed Tulio as a starting first teamer. So I would put a true running back or true receiver there instead of Darren Sproles because he's going to be on the special team selections coming up later on. And now on the defensive side of the ball, this is roughly about the same thing I came up with when I did my first team All-Pro selections or first team All-Decade selections. I have J.J. Watt at defensive end. I've got Calais Campbell as his backup. Because people forget, Calais Campbell's one of the best defensive ends in the NFL over the past 5 or 6 years. I mean, he's been dominant. People always say, oh, Yannick Ngakoue's better because of all the pressure numbers and stuff like that. Well, actually, Calais Campbell's got more quarterback hits, I'm pretty sure, the last couple of years than Yannick Ngakoue. I think he's actually a better run defender as well. So he's highly underrated. I'm glad to see he got this acknowledgement because he totally deserves it. Cameron Jordan, he's another guy who's been up there in terms of production. So I think that's about right. I had Khalil Mack listed as a defensive end on my all-decade team, my predictions. Obviously, they shifted him to outside linebacker here. So that makes room for a guy who I left off, and I think he's probably the more controversial one, and that would be Julius Peppers. I mean, I'm going to talk about J.J. Watt, by the way, because J.J. Watt's obvious why he got here. But Peppers is a guy who has 30 first-team All-Pro selections in his career, but only one of those came in the decade. And he made 4 Pro Bowls during the decade. Overall, during the 2010s, he had 78.5 sacks. So he was good, 22 forced fumbles, by the way. Also, very good. But was he really, I mean, could you really say that that's untouchable? I think there's some guys who could have been up there and replaced him. I think Cameron Wake, like I said, I get the numbers right here. I put these tweets out shortly after the announcements came. I got Cameron Wake, who has more quarterback sacks, who's got more quarterback hits, about the same number of forced fumbles, playing defensive end. Because I'm pretty sure you can list Wake as a defensive end because I think he shifted around a little bit during the decade. But overall, I think you can say list him as a defensive end, you'll be fine. So someone like him, I think he probably should have actually gotten the selection over Julius Peppers. And I love Julius Peppers. He's one of my favorite players of all time, but I still think Cameron Wake would have been the way to go if we're talking about best defensive ends of the decade. That's really my only complaint about the defensive end position. If we move to defensive tackles, Aaron Donald, Suh, Geno Atkins, my issue is Fletcher Cox. I agree with the other 3. I don't think Fletcher Cox really set himself apart to deserve this award. I think I had going Gerald McCoy. I don't think there's much of a difference statistically between the 2 of them. Gerald McCoy had 6 Pro Bowls, 1-time first-team All-Pro. Cox, on the other hand, 5 Pro Bowls, 1-time first-team All-Pro, and the Super Bowl title. There's really not a huge difference between these 2 players in terms of what they've done over the past decade. I just think that McCoy had maybe a little bit more consistency in a shorter period of time. He's starting to fade a little bit now. I think maybe that played into him not getting the selection. But he's been better at getting after the quarterback than Fletcher Cox has. Maybe you argue that Fletcher Cox has been a slightly better run defender, but it's not significantly better. And even if you want to make a stretch, I could see Cameron Hayward potentially even unseating Fletcher Cox in the spot. I know he has not been nearly as consistent as long as Cox has been, but over the last 3 years, I'd argue he's been a much better player than Fletcher Cox. So especially this past season, where he had 83 tackles from the defensive tackle position. But that's my main issue with the defensive tackle spot. I'm sorry, I haven't been actually looking at it on the screen. I just realized that. The other position, inside linebacker, Luke Kuechly, Bob Wagner, Patrick Willis, those I totally agree with. I think people might raise their eyebrows at Patrick Willis a little bit because of the amount of time he missed during this decade. He retired pretty early. Wow, it's been a long time. He retired after 2014, so he's been gone for quite a while. And even in 2014, he only played 6 games. He's been gone for a while, but I think Patrick Willis started off the decade so strong with 4 Pro Bowls and 3 first-team All-Pro selections that I think it's hard to ignore him. And remember, he was the best middle linebacker since Ray Lewis. I mean, really, for my generation, he really was. He was the best middle linebacker since Ray Lewis, and the first guy we got to see come into the NFL like that and just go crazy. I mean, it was awesome watching him play. He's one of my favorite players to go back and watch still today. So I totally understand him getting the vote. The only other guy who I would say might unseat Patrick Willis, or someone I could think was obviously deserving of some kind of acknowledgement, but he's been overlooked throughout his entire career, was Lavonte David. Now, David is a first-team All-Pro in 2013, made Pro Bowl in 2015. Those are his only real accolades, but this guy's been listed as an outside linebacker in the past, which is partially why he hasn't made as many Pro Bowls as some of the other guys, because he's not the traditional sack artist outside linebacker. He's the guy who actually focuses more on playing. Well, it's a 4-3 defense, Tampa Bay. It's not 3-4, so he's not rushing the passer, basically. And in this decade, he started in 2012, so from 2012 to 2019, he had 1,008 tackles, which is it's a significant amount. I mean, he's really been one of the best players in the league over the time. You look at Luke Kuechly, he had 1,092 tackles from 2012 to 2019. And we're talking about Lavonte David really just being, I mean, what? Only if that's less than 100 tackles behind him, he's been 84 behind him, I'm pretty sure. Don't check my math. Math is not my strong suit on the fly, but I mean, 11 interceptions, 21 forced fumbles for Lavonte David, 14 fumble recoveries, 3 touchdowns, 1,008 tackles, 52 quarterback hits, 45 passes defense. It's an overall great resume. I think if you're looking at the entirety of the decade, doesn't have the peak that Patrick Willis does, but has definitely been producing consistently enough to be in consideration. Moving on to outside linebacker, I'm kind of surprised there's only 3 and not 4. I would have thought there would have been 4 outside linebackers, especially because that just makes more sense. But if you're running, whatever, it's their list. I don't understand it really. I would have had 4. I think you should probably put 4 outside linebackers, but they didn't do that. But Von Miller, that's obvious. Chandler Jones, I think that's another obvious one. He's been a dominant beast and been highly overlooked because of the teams he's played for. And then Khalil Mack, like I said, that's another one, defensive player of the year. I don't think you can overlook that. But the guy I think that does get lost in this whole conversation, I talked about Cameron Wake earlier, playing a defensive end. The guy who I think gets lost at outside linebacker is Terrell Suggs. Now, Suggs has won 2 Super Bowls during this decade, one with Baltimore and one with Kansas City this past year, even though he didn't play a large part in that team. Made 7 Pro Bowls throughout his career, 4 of which came during this decade. He was the first-team All-Pro in 2011, and he was the Defensive Player of the Year in 2011. Now, if we look back at the Defensive Player of the Year list from forever, we look at all the defensive players throughout time. In this past decade, 2 of the guys did not make the All-Decade team who won Defensive Player of the Year. One was Troy Polamalu in 2010, but that's because he retired quite a few years ago. He's already been elected to the Hall of Fame. He's been retired for a while. Terrell Suggs was still playing in the NFL this past year, and he won Defensive Player of the Year. So I don't see how Julius Peppers can be on this list, can be on the All-Decade team, but you don't have Terrell Suggs. Because Suggs has been arguably just as consistent, if not more consistent than Peppers was during this time, and he did not retire as early as Peppers did. I mean, look, if you look at his numbers, he had how many seasons with less than 7 sacks? He missed most of 2014 with an injury and missed half of 2012. And he had 6.5 sacks this past season. So in the 10 years, he has 7 years with at least 7 sacks. It's pretty consistent. He's got 8 years with at least 8 sacks. So this guy's been very consistent throughout the entirety of the decade. And he has the Defensive Player of the Year award, which I think should really help him out. I would personally take Terrell Suggs on this All-Decade team. But again, I don't know if I could do it over anyone that's on the team right now. It's just my issue, which is why I think there should be a 4th outside linebacker. I mean, if you think about it, 3 doesn't really make any sense because what formation would you be playing, which would only have 3. And if you're doing first and second teams, then you need 4 to make it even. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me why you have that list that way. And then cornerbacks, yeah, this isn't surprising at all. Patrick Pearson, Darrelle Revis, Richard Sherman, all future Hall of Famers. Probably the best 3 corners from this past decade without doubt, even though Darrelle Revis retired a little bit earlier, wasn't here the whole time. I don't think that should matter. But he probably was the best shutdown corner from this past decade, even better than Sherman. The one who does get left out, I forgot to mention this guy, is Stephon Gilmore, who was Defensive Player of the Year this year. So technically, he was also Defensive Player of the Year this decade, who didn't get on the list. And the reason for that is even though he's been very good, he's at a high peak. It was one of the weakest Defensive Player of the Years to win in recent history. Maybe even the weakest of the decade, especially after J.J. Watt won 3 times and Aaron Donald won twice. So you could argue he's the weakest Defensive Player of the Year from the past decade, and he's really only been at this peak for 2 years. I mean, he's got 3 Pro Bowls, and he's only made first team All-Pro twice each in the last 2 years. So he's been good, but not consistently great throughout the decade. So I can understand why he's not here. Although I would argue that he probably should be in over Chris Harris, because let's just go to the defensive back spots. I mean, if we put Chris Harris in, that's probably because he played a large role in Denver's defense. When they had DeMarcus Ware and Valmer, and they won the Super Bowl. Well, he's got 4 Pro Bowls, and he was a first-team All-Pro. So he's got some good accolades there. But, I mean, really, think about Stephon Gilmore. I think he's been consistently produced more passes Defensive Player of the Year, 2-time first-team All-Pro. He's in his prime right now, which probably hurts him because he hasn't been in his prime throughout the decade. But I mean, really, Gilmore's not young either. It's like he's been in the league for a while. He entered in 2012. Chris Harris entered in 2011. There's really not a huge difference. I think actually I'd probably take Gilmore over Chris Harris in terms of the past decade, even if Harris has 2 second-team All-Pro selections. So for me, I think that's probably the biggest mistake in terms of the defensive backs or in terms of the corners, because I do think Stephon Gilmore deserved to be up here. Now, if we go on to the safeties, Eric Berry, Earl Thomas, Eric Weddle, I think no one will argue Eric Berry and Earl Thomas. I know Berry dealt with a lot of injuries. He didn't play his last year. His career, which really could have been a Hall of Fame career, has been cut short by injuries and illness. But 5 Pro Bowls, 3-time first-team All-Pro. This guy was a guy who played at a Defensive Player of the Year caliber level whenever he was healthy, pretty much. So I think he obviously deserves it. And then Earl Thomas has been much more consistent. He's been much healthier. He probably is a future Hall of Famer. And he was a member of the Legion of Boom, which helps out. 7 Pro Bowls, 3-time first-team All-Pro as well, and also won that Super Bowl with Seattle. So those 2 are slam dunk. The people in Seattle keep saying Cam Chancellor should be in over Eric Weddle. Shut your mouth. You are so wrong. It's unbelievably bad how wrong you are at this. It should not be Cam Chancellor over Eric Weddle. And maybe I don't know if I have. I don't think I have the tweet saved. Dang, I was hoping to pull it up so I didn't have to do the research on the fly. But Cam Chancellor, who I argue was a great player. I love watching Cam Chancellor play. He's the perfect safety in my opinion. The guy who can cover, the guy who can hit, he can do all things. First, he had made 4 Pro Bowls, and he's got 2 second-team All-Pro selections. That's it, along with the Super Bowl. So he's got Legion of Boom, which I think people would probably say counts for too much. You shouldn't take that into account as much as you should the personal stuff. So 4 Pro Bowls, 2-time second-team All-Pro. In comparison, Eric Weddle, in this past decade, 6 Pro Bowls, 2-time first-team All-Pro. And how many second-team All-Pro selections did he have? 3. So he's got 5 total All-Pro selections compared to Cam Chancellor's 2. And Weddle has 2 first-team All-Pro selections, and Cam Chancellor has 2 second-team All-Pro selections. And that's it for Cam Chancellor. So to me, it's 100% in Eric Weddle's favor. I don't see any scenario in which Cam Chancellor should get it over Weddle. I mean, you can argue the Super Bowl win helps out a lot, but I think Eric Weddle clearly has the best resume from the past decade. Because he entered in the NFL in 2007 too, so he's been here the whole time. And he just retired this past year, so he played for the entirety of the decade. And he was consistently good for the entirety of the decade. And he finished the decade with, let me make sure I'm not getting in the extra stat from the year before. He finished the decade with over 900 tackles, 6 sacks, 8 forced fumbles, 6 fumble recoveries, 25 interceptions, 3 touchdowns. I mean, I think it's clearly Eric Weddle. I don't think it's even close to Cam Chancellor. I make a bigger argument for Harrison Smith than I would for Cam Chancellor. Harrison Smith is just a personal favorite player of mine. So for me, it is a little personal because I like him so much. Harrison Smith, 5 Pro Bowls, 1-time first-team All-Pro. He's also got a second-team All-Pro selection in 2018. So he's been there at a higher peak, I'd argue, than Cam Chancellor. just as versatile as Cam Chancellor in my mind. Good coverage in every way possible. Good coverage. Very sneaky in terms of how he disguises what he's going to do. Great tackler, great playmaker, X factor. So I think Harrison Smith is a guy who probably deserves something. I don't think he would have beaten out Eric Weddle. He might have beaten out Tyrann Mathieu. That's the guy I think is probably Tyrann Mathieu and Chris Harris are going to be the guys who come in under the most fire at the defensive back spot. Now, I know Tyrann Mathieu is a very versatile player, but he only made one Pro Bowl this past decade in 2015 when he probably should have won Defensive Player of the Year if he had stayed healthy. He missed the last 2 games with an injury. If he'd stayed healthy, I think he would have won Defensive Player of the Year. But 2-time first-team All-Pro, including this past year, 1 Pro Bowl and the Super Bowl win this past year. His next factor, I love Honey Badger. He's one of my favorite players as well. I love safeties. So safeties Eric Well, Cam Chancellor, Eric Barrow, Thomas Tyrann Mathieu, Harrison Smith. All these guys are some of my favorite players. But just looking at the accolades from the past decade, I think Harrison Smith probably should have gone on and gotten on this list ahead of Tyrann Mathieu. That's just how I feel about it. Especially if you're going to take a defense back. I mean, I know you could say Tyrann Mathieu is technically like safety/corner, so maybe you can put him defensive backs that way. But let's be honest, I mean, he's listed as a safety pretty much everywhere. So if you're going to put him in there, I would put Harrison Smith there just as quickly. And then on our punters, I'm not going to say too much about punters because I'm not going to pretend like you know everything that's going on with them. I did have Andy Lee as my second-team punter. They've gone with Shane Lechler instead. That's perfectly fine. Shane Lechler is probably one of the greatest punters of all time, probably top 2 or 3. So I have no complaints that they want to switch that up. Kickers, that's the exact same kicker combination I had. I don't think it's close. I think it's pretty obvious it's those guys. Punt return. I had Devin Hester listed as a punt return, not a kick return, but I think the combination, whichever way you want to swing it, is fine with me. I don't think that really shakes things up too much, except I had Jacoby Jones as a return man over Tyreek Hill. Again, I don't think, it's not a huge thing, but I don't think Tyreek Hill did enough at the return spot over the last couple of years to make it to the all-decade team. I know he had one really great year as a return man, but that's probably it. I mean, Tyler Lockett also had one great year as a return man, like big whoop. It's return men come and go very quickly in the NFL. There are guys who sometimes are in the league 1 year and they're an all-pro return man, and then next year, like Farrell Cooper's an example, and then next year, they switch teams, they've been cut, and they're suddenly a backup and they're lost in no man's land. So this is something that happens very often. I don't think Tyreek Hill did enough to earn that spot. And again, Darren Sproles pops up here on the punt returns, which is the issue I have with him popping up as a flex, because why would you pop him up there when you know he's going to show up later? And I'd argue, again, even if you include kick return yards, he would not be a flex on the team. If you're really talking about a flex player, I would take an offensive caliber player, not guys focused mainly on special teams, because you have a specific part of the all-decade team dedicated to special teams. So I would have taken someone like a Matt Forte. There's a good option. Todd Gurley if we're going to do flex. DeAndre Hopkins if we're flexing someone. So I would take one of those guys as opposed to using a flex on Darren Sproles and then just putting in as a return man instead. And on to the coaches. Bill Belichick, that's pretty obvious. I don't have any complaints about that. Pete Carroll is a guy I think is overrated a little bit. I think he gets a lot of credit for what's happened in Seattle, but that organization has not drafted well the last couple of years. And in fact, after they built Legion of Boom, they haven't drafted well pretty much at all. So I think he gets a little too much credit for what's going on in Seattle or what happened in Seattle early in the decade. And honestly, if we're taking someone to be like the second coach on the all-decade team, I think John Harbaugh. I think John Harbaugh is the guy who probably there's just that spot. Even though I know Baltimore went through a little bit of a down period after the Super Bowl win, I'd still take John Harbaugh. Well, that wraps this up pretty much. These awesome guys we talked about. Justin Houston potentially. Ryan Kerrigan would probably be another guy who toss around in there, but I don't really think he would knock out one of the edge players they listed in favor of Ryan Kerrigan or Justin Houston. I just think they've been very consistent, very good players who are probably deserving of mention, deserving of being noteworthy in the decade. But yeah, that basically wraps up my analysis of it. I know I probably just talk through it. Really didn't give much of a breakdown, but I did tell you guys who I think got left out. Harrison Smith, Gerald McCoy, maybe Cam Hayward if we're talking about recency bias. Stephon Gilmore has been very good recently and won Defensive Player of the Year. He got overlooked entirely. Harrison, I think I said Harrison Smith already. Well, Harrison Smith again. DeAndre Hopkins. I brought Matt Forte. That's a guy I think consider as well because of how much he brought to the game, both as a receiver and as a running back. I mean, well, displaying between being able to be a dual threat back. Todd Gurley, again, something recent. If you're considering Todd Gurley, you probably want to bring in Ezekiel Elliott just to have him in the conversation briefly. And Terrell Suggs. I think those are the guys who really had good cases and just got overlooked. I mean, it sucks and it happens. I when I built my own Decky team, I kind of tried to make it as inclusive as possible because I don't like to split hairs all the time with these guys, especially when they're great. I think if you're a great player, you should be acknowledged as a great player. But regardless, this is how the All-Decky team turned out. I'm overall pretty happy with it. I think a few things need to be changed or should have been changed. But overall, very great group, very noteworthy group. And I can't wait to see which guys turn out to be Hall of Famers. Now, if you're watching this video right now and you somehow made it all the way to the end, I don't know how you did it because it's just been me rambling for basically the last 36 minutes. But Mark and I are about to do a mock draft where we do the second round. We've already done the first round. We're going to do the second round coming up very soon. It's probably the video in that direction. No, maybe that direction. Well, regardless, look at the videos to the left and right of this one and figure out which one is me and Mark doing the second round of the mock draft for this coming season. And click on that one. I guarantee it's going to be hilarious. It's going to be fun. You can get to see some names you probably wouldn't have thought about otherwise for the draft. It's probably going to be much more enlightening than this video, so feel free to go check that out, and I'll see you guys later.